Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and constant reader, Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King Newbie Matt Freeman, fresh from his prayer quest through the wilderness of Colorado. How's it going today, Matt?
Help!
He's fine. God's got him.
I fell down a ravine.
Just pray. Just pray.
Somehow I made it back just in time.
I mean, that's the power of the white right there.
Yeah, I had faith.
There you go. This week on the show, The Stand continues with chapters 52 and 53. Gosh, Matt, can you believe we're chapter 52 already? It just feels like we just started this book.
It does. A lot of twists and turns and shifts and shimmies in this plot, but yeah, it's interesting. I can don't want to start off on a negative note because I don't really mean this in a negative way, but I was like, I do see why this is people's least favorite part, because it's like there's the least level of threat and chaos and like drama, right? I mean, we do have drama, we certainly do, but it's pretty much all centered in like Harold. It's a very particular kind of like dread, actually, which is actually. For my money, it's actually no less sort of anxiety producing, but it's actually kind of an unpleasant anxiety. Just subjectively speaking, like I don't like being worried about Harold constantly. Sure.
I
don't know. These are my high level, gut level impressions of these chapters.
I gotcha. I mean, we do spend quite a bit of time in the Boulder Free Zone, establishing the Boulder Free Zone. We've got this looming threat on the horizon, but the book has kind of just pulled over to the side of the road and paused for us to do all this stuff. And I think you're right. It's not that it's bad. I love so much of this week and last week, but now we've got 2 weeks in a row where we stayed here. Just kind of sorting out what society is going to look like. That's like 160, 170 pages roughly. That's a lot of book. It's a lot of book to spend kind of spinning our wheels a little bit. And I like I said, I love it. I love it. I totally get why a person could be reading this book and being like, what are we doing? What is this book now? I could totally get that.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of stuff to talk about, though.
Oh, yes. We're not going to go as long as last week, though. We've made a pledge. We promised. We met in our ad hoc committee right before the show, and we all voted to not make long podcasts anymore. So
that's right.
It's never going to happen again.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop talking after the hour mark, and Scott's going to just have to bring it home.
Oh, well, that's a lot of pressure. I think we're going to be over an hour, Matt. It is still 16 pages of writing in this script.
Clock's ticking, Scott.
Oh, God. Let's get right into our first chapter of the week, chapter 52. This chapter begins with Mother Abigail praying to God for some help. We learn that she doesn't feel God's presence anymore and thusly assumes that she's done something wrong. She's sinned in some way. She's answered in her prayers not by God, but by Randall Flagg himself, who not only scares her, but actually takes credit for the acts of God, including the one we saw way back when she was at home, where the weasels had kind of surrounded her and then suddenly dispersed a thing that she attributed to God in the moment. He is now taking credit for that. It's kind of a bizarre and very uncomfortable opening to the week's reading, right?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was kind of awesome, actually. It almost feels like something coming in from Dr. Sleep, where you've got this like psychic, spiritual psychic struggle between these great powers. Kind of feels like an escalation of stakes, where the spiritual element of things is being brought front and center, right? There've been these like hints of this cosmic conflict, but this is like our two. This is Gandalf versus the Witch King, right? But we're seeing a little snippet of it, right? It's not the full showdown. It's maybe it's a prelude, but yeah, I thought it was really great, really kind of shocking way to begin the week's reading.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note here is that at least in this dream or vision or whatever we want to call it, Mother Abigail loses. And I think it's interesting to kind of think about this and step back a little bit, because we began this season 2 journey with Salem's Lot, a story with a man of faith kind of watching as his faith is found wanting against the full force of evil. That's what happens to Father Callahan in that story. And now we're here at the last book of the season, also kind of directly thrown into a situation where this great woman of faith, this Mother Abigail, who, like, I think out of any character in a Stephen King novel so far, is the one that perhaps best represents like the ideal, I don't want to say Christian, because it's more than that, but the ideal like person of faith, I guess. Like
Mm-hmm.
she is unwavering in her belief system, and yet here her faith is kind of found wanting again. Her faith is kind of put to the test, and we see at least the dream version, she is attacked by a wolf and wakes up right before the wolf eats her, but still it's as if to say, you lost in this encounter with the Man in Black. That's interesting, right?
Yeah. I had a similar thought comparing this event to the struggle of Father Callahan. Because I think that the concept of faith being demonstrated here is very similar to the one being articulated in Salem's Lot, where the question is, is your faith strong enough to stand before the enemy unflinching? And it's fascinating because, like, that's a hell of a thing to expect, right? Like, what kind of a person does manage to live without any kind of doubt whatsoever, even in the face of evil, staring them down, directly undermining and attacking your faith? It seems a tall order, right? It's like, this is what the White asks of people, is this kind of like perfect, unbreakable faith. Again, like you said, Father Callahan wasn't up to the task. And I mean, it's interesting because it seemed like Mother Abigail was up to the task, but I guess in this moment, the fear overcame her. I also think it's not so I maybe I read this scene different from you, but I don't think that it's so much like, oh, she had a stare down with the Man in Black and she lost. It's more like she realized that she has been indulging herself in pride and enjoying being the prophet of the free zone a little bit too much, and her response to this is to say, I need to get myself away from these temptations, from the temptation of pride, and walk about in the desert like Moses. And that really has nothing to do with how that confrontation with the Man in Black actually went down.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. That is kind of, I mean, that's the thing, the note that she leaves, and I think that's the implication we're left with. But it does happen, like the inciting incident of that decision to walk about is this vision she has, this dream, and I do think the dream is representative of her failings because of that pride, which is interesting because, like, I don't know, we saw very little of it, right? We saw, I guess, like, these people are coming here to see me, and she feels the swelling pride for it. And part of me is like, what did you do wrong? Like, like I think maybe more of that is meant to be seen. But, I think one of the interesting things about this is, we see in the free zone meeting later, everyone's like, I don't know why she left because of pride. She's like, seems like the most humble and nice person ever. Like, nobody there agrees with her assessment of herself, which maybe is exactly part of the problem. But I mean, I agree with you that I think the interesting thing is that we see, you talk about pride, you talk about taking credit for things. That is the thing that the Man in Black is doing in this sequence, right? He's taking credit for everything, every great thing that has happened or will happen. He's saying, that was me, I was me. And that is, I think, something we're supposed to see here as not godliness, not faithfulness, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's what's going on here. But
yeah, well, as to your point about, are we supposed to think that she's right, is one way you could phrase this. Like,
sure.
Are we the reader supposed to think, oh, she has been prideful? The closest thing I can see is we, unlike the rest of the townsfolk, got to witness the moment where her pride did distract her for that crucial 10 seconds where she could have identified that something was off with Nadine, but she was sort of too busy enjoying the accolades, you could say. You could argue anyway, right?
Sure.
And that's where my mind goes. And maybe, if we're going to say, like, this is God speaking to her, then maybe, God is like hey, you took your eye off the ball and now some bad shit's going to happen and I'm mad at you.
Yeah, but I think you're spot on there. But isn't it ironic that God's like, hey, you took your eye off the ball and now bad shit's going to happen, and I'm not going to do anything about it? That's your job. It was your job to detect this, actually.
It is, right? And that's the thing, is like, I'm not sure if I fully endorse Mother Abigail's view of God as an agent. For all we know, again, like it's fun to consider. She could be totally wrong about her sort of worldview, and it could just be like the man in black is basically baiting her into abandoning her charge by telling her, making her feel like she's been prideful and she needs to go soul searching, when it's all just him putting these thoughts in her head. It's entirely possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough to reconcile kind of the way the book is presenting, faith and belief in these higher powers to us, and the things we kind of know about King's view on these things, and not just, extra textually, but intertextually in all the various characters of faith he's written through the books that we've read, who are usually corrupted, evil, or lacking characters, right? Yeah. And so like we're kind of forced in this situation now where we've read, I don't know how many of these books now, and we're like, okay, but here's a character that is like super faithful. What do we make of that? What are we supposed to think about these things? What are we supposed to think about blind faith, or what are you supposed to think about belief, or like, when we'll talk about this much later, but when Glenn goes on his rant about rationalism versus irrationalism, like, are we supposed to take that as like Bible? Like, is that King speaking to us about his worldview through a character, or are we supposed to look at this thing and go, I don't think that's right? And I'm asking these questions without offering an answer to them. I don't know, and I think it's really going to take the conclusion of the book to tell us for sure, but it's certainly a head scratcher.
Yeah, I will say that this is consistent with what we pointed out previously, where the thing that distinguishes Mother Abigail from the other religious zealot characters is that she takes the suffering onto herself, as opposed to, wagging her finger at others and telling them that they're not being sufficiently whatever. Yet again, she has been like, oh, I made the mistake. I am going to go, and I am going to be the one who suffers, and, try to the maximum extent possible to take the responsibility for what she sees as her mistake, which, is in keeping with her whole personality at this point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Great. All right, so Mother Abigail, because of her pride, decides to go wandering through the wilderness. Let's remember, Matt, that she is a 108-year-old woman, and like we said at the beginning, the disappearance of Mother Abigail is kind of the event that a lot of this chapter turns around. And I think it is really interesting that our character's initial reaction to this 108-year-old woman going wandering through the Colorado wilderness alone is to do nothing, because that's faith sometimes, right? We gotta do nothing.
Yeah. I was really reminded at this point of our discussion of Ridley Scott's film Kingdom of Heaven last week on the Doofcast.
Go check that show out. Yeah.
Good. Because like that's actually a movie that trucks in this idea a lot, where it's like, well, it's the will of God that Mother Abigail be left alone to wander like Moses, because that's what she said she wanted to do. But then you're like, okay, well, what if it's actually the will of God to like test us and see whether we're willing to let a 108-year-old woman fall in a ravine and die? What if that's the will of God? Like, right. Like, how presumptuous are you to think that you know the will of God just because a thing happened?
Yeah, this is the old "I sent you 3 boats" story, right? Like, this is like God provides for people through other people. Like, that's kind of how it works. So yeah, the idea of just like, we got to sit on our hands. And I think the wonderful thing about this is actually they all say this in the moment, but then like none of them do it, right? Like Stu jumps on the opportunity, as well as Ralph, and then like we kind of see through some of the other people that, oh, we were gonna go look for her anyway. And so like it was kind of all blustering talk at the beginning at this moment of shock, but really they were all gonna go looking for her anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
All right. So we from here we cut over to Franny, who finds out that her man is out with Harold and will be so till 9:30 p.m. We find out later what they're doing is they're out looking for Mother Abigail, but we'll get to that in a minute. All we know right now is that Franny sees this as an opportunity, pokes around in Harold's house while he's out because she's very, very nervous about the fact that he read her diary, and so she decides to go snooping about his house for something, and so she does that.
I felt like it was kind of a relief that she actually does, sneak into his house. Because at this point in the story, we, the reader, are getting kind of tired of our main characters going like, well, Harold seems really scary, but, and then doing nothing about it. And
Sure.
we kind of want someone to do something so that even if they can't preempt him from doing something awful, at least they will have tried, and we can be like, can feel like something was done. I don't know. I kind of appreciated this on that level, even if she doesn't find anything really.
I get that for sure. Yeah, and I mean, nothing happens from this visit. I mean, for her at least, she finds nothing.
Right.
There's no. I mean, the event that spins off of this is specifically him noticing that someone was there, not that she actually finds anything. But you're right. Like you can't have your characters like passively worry forever. You need them to take action at some point, and this is Franny trying to take action. And I like that as a necessary point in the narrative, but also just a necessary like point for the character where she's like, I have to do something. Like I'm worried about this and I need to do something about it. And I didn't even really have an objective in my searching through Harold's stuff. Like, what am I expecting to find here? I don't think Franny actually knows. She just needs to take action in some way to calm herself about this increasing nervousness about Harold's potential.
Yeah, exactly.
Nervousness that, by the way, is completely correct. She's 100% correct about every bad thing she's feeling here.
Yep.
Yeah. So Fran's worry, as we said, has escalated. And I mean, she even says here that like, oh God, he could be off with Stu in order to shoot him in the back, which is like, again, perfect instincts there. But the part I really wanted to talk about with you here in this moment as she's thinking about Harold and walking towards his house. So the text says this. She didn't know if Harold was the sort of man she hypothesized. Not yet, not for sure. But she knew in their heart that there was a place for people like that now. Oh, yes, indeedy. I think it's just really interesting to me that we live in, like you and I live in this world that doesn't really have black and white, right? Where, people aren't easily classifiable and bucketifiable, right? But King has kind of, through what he's done in this book, created this world of black and white, of good and evil, of Vegas versus Boulder, of Flag versus Abagail. And of course it's more complex than that because we've gotten to meet people that live in both of these worlds. Like we've seen characters like Trash Can Man, who is not a good character, certainly, but is also definitely a victim of circumstances that extend, beyond his control. So while this world might not be as actually binary as it's made to seem, I think the existence of like when you live in a world in which you know that there are two civilizations left on the country and one is the bad people one and this is the good people one, it kind of creates that binary in your characters, right? So Franny is sitting here and she's like, oh, I think Harold might be a bad person and I know where those people go. And it just allows you to bucket people much more easily than you would be able to otherwise, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's just overall kind of background, really critical choice that he's made with this story. Because it's not just Harold is a flawed, right? It's like, no, there is textually a demon named Randall Flagg who is waiting to psychically snatch up anybody who starts to fall off the straight and narrow in the direction of evil. You've got in this chapter, you've got these moments where both Nadine and Harold sort of feel the pull. Harold talks about the magnetism. You've got Larry on some level, in a more distant sense, when he's on the verge of some fateful choice, he hears the clocking of the heels in the distance. And it's like, that's the pull on Larry. Right. And I think it really changes it from just being like, oh, it's a story about flawed humans struggling. It's like, no, there's evil, and it's, and if you mess up, you're at risk of just being pulled all the way down that well and becoming a monster. I guess it's like, it's doing that thing we always talk about, where it's taking a thing that's very human and very mundane, and then it's elevating it using a fantasy conceit. So that I guess the fantasy conceit here is basically saying like there's a slippery slope once you start making bad choices that sort of leads to more bad choices. And we're doing that in the persona of Randall Flagg.
Oh, I think it allows you're absolutely right that it is the genre trope of making literal what is metaphorical, but this idea that like you don't, if you don't feel like you're a good person, like similar to how Larry feels like he ain't no nice guy, like there's this very convenient whole other place where you belong, right? Like if you don't feel like you belong here, you have two choices, right? Like if you feel like you're not as good as these goody two shoes or whatever, you feel like you're not welcome in this community, or you feel like there's something different or wrong about you. There's this guy over here going, yeah, totally, and you'd be more than welcome here, right? So it is this kind of literalization of this definite feeling of that like leads people down paths of bad choices. So yeah, and it is literal here because you're right. Harold describes it as a magnetic pull. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great.
So Fran finds Harold's house dark and most importantly locked. I think this is a really good touch that the book includes here, that like nobody in Boulder is locking their houses, because why would they? Because there's no really such thing as private property. Although I will say, like, I get that reasoning, but also like maybe sometimes you just don't want like someone walking into your house while you're naked, you know, like, yeah, maybe just like I'm naked right now. I don't want you to see me naked. But
I mean, you also live in a world where you know for a fact that there were like ravening bands of killers. I just habitually lock my door anyway when I walk into the door. So maybe that would just be a habit, you know?
Sure. I mean, also like, I know like everything's free and stuff, but like, if I got a table in the house that I've set up shop in, I don't want to like leave for the day and come back and find that someone's taken my table and I have to go get a new table. Like, I don't understand it's not a big deal to just go get a new table, but like it's an extra chore that I really don't want to do. So I'd probably still lock my house. Maybe I'm just as evil as Harold here, but I mean, symbolically it works as a good, you know, differentiating factor. As well as the fact that he's living further away from like the town center than anyone else. No one has moved as far out as he is currently living.
Yes, it has all sorts of foreboding connotations in this context, even though it's not altogether an unreasonable thing to do.
Yeah. I also really like this bit here, Matt. Harold could grin until his face cracked and slap people on the back and help pass the time of day with folks. He could and did gladly offer his help whenever it was asked for, and sometimes when it wasn't. He could and did make people like him. And it was a fact that he was highly regarded in Boulder. I think this little passage is actually really, really important. And I'm so glad that King included it here at this point of the book. One thing that we've done over the past couple weeks, both me and the characters in the book have so frequently been in the point of view of someone who doesn't trust Harold. You know, like all of our characters are kind of characters like touched by God, literally, who all recognize that there's something wrong with Harold, right? You know, Stu, Nick, Larry, Franny, all of these people are like, I don't know about this guy. And it caused us, at least me last week, to offer up the idea of like, hey, maybe his ability to like fake people out and put on this mask of friendliness and gregariousness is actually like not working on anyone at all, because all the characters we've seen, it's not working on. But I think this really helps us recontextualize this, because we learn here that no, actually, with the exception of these characters that we've been in the head of the last couple weeks, most people in Boulder really like Harold and they enjoy being around him, and he's very helpful to them, and he's planted himself in this community very successfully. And I think it's really important to establish that. We want to show that like this thing that he's doing is actually working, which makes, the absurdity of his hatred all the more, I think.
Yeah, it's a little reminder to us that Stu and Franny have known him for much longer than they have. And, to the extent that Larry also picks up some bad vibes, that's at least in part because of Leo, right? And so everybody else is just taken in. And then, this moment that you've picked out here, plus I think the later moment at the meeting where he kind of makes his play and everybody takes it really positively. And they're like, great job, Harold. Yeah, that's the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
Between those two things, you're like, oh yeah, like everybody does like Harold.
Yeah. I'm really, really glad we did this, because if we hadn't done this, I really think the conclusion would be that, no one really likes Harold at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that the story does this, because I think it's realistic. Like, people generally want to believe the best in people.
Sure.
If somebody seems smiling and friendly and maybe they do you a small favor, you're gonna feel positively disposed toward them. You're gonna kind of feel like you owe them, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I think the vibes actually have to be just extraordinarily bad to keep that instinct of generosity from activating. It's kind of a thread in these chapters that I don't want to necessarily drill down in right here, but there's a thread of people's better nature being used against them. And the fact that people are so willing and eager to look past Harold being kind of weird is one of the biggest kind of indicators of this. We're gonna see more later, though.
I like that. Yeah, we'll talk about that later, I think. For me, it's just really frustrating, because it's like, Harold, just fake it till you make it, bud. Like, you're so close, actually. Like, you're actually so close. Like, the thing you and I were talking about earlier before the show, like, Harold could totally get laid if he wanted to. Like,
yeah.
Like, enough people in the city like him that aren't Franny, that he could definitely hook up with someone if he wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just like, he won't do it.
No, it would be betraying his old self or some bullshit, right? Yeah, it's exhausting and infuriating.
Mm-hmm. So Franny gets into the house and really notices nothing out of the ordinary, except that Harold's shades are drawn, which again is something that no one else in Boulder does. But then Nadine comes knocking on the door, and I really love this moment. This is such a wonderful, wonderful moment, the way we've kind of structured these two chapters, because I think we echo the same sentiment as Franny here in the moment. Nadine, what? Why is she? What? Why is Nadine coming here? And of course, we know something about Nadine that Franny does not in the moment, and so the idea that she's trying to team up with Harold to us is like, oh, wait, that can't be good. It's just this wonderful moment of like this perfect shocking moment that I think works both on the character level and on the larger narrative level.
Yeah, it does give us a lot of questions. I mean, so this is before the town meeting, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is before like all that other stuff with Larry happens. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just. I mean, I was 99.9% sure, but
yeah, she gives a throwaway line a little bit later in the next chapter. That's basically like, she just felt this weird pull to come here and wasn't sure why and didn't know how to explain it. And,
okay, maybe I missed that line, but we do know that she's going to end up with him later, though. So.
Yes, correct. Yeah,
right.
So from here we cut over to Stu and to see what he is up to with Harold on this day. It turns out that Harold is the only man of action in this fucking city who decides that they should maybe go looking for the 108-year-old woman just walking around in Colorado. I love this little statement here. Yes, Harold agrees, but most of those cows are sick, Stu. He's talking about the worshipped cows in India. They're always near the point of starvation. Some are tubercular. And because they're an aggregate symbol, and all because they're an aggregate symbol. I can't read today, Matt. The people are convinced God will take care of them, just as our people are convinced God will take care of Mother Abigail. But I have my own doubts about a God that says it's right to let a poor dumb cow wander around in pain. Ralph looked momentarily uncomfortable, and Stu knew what he was feeling. He felt it himself, and it gave him a way to measure how he felt about Mother Abigail himself. He felt that Harold was edging into blasphemy. I love this so much.
So do you think Harold is intentionally calling Mother Abigail a poor dumb cow?
Yes, I do.
100%, yes.
Yeah, I think he's letting his true feelings about Abigail slip without directly doing it in the way that no one kind of realize. I mean, they do realize, but they don't actually make the literal connection.
Yeah. So actually, no, you're right. I think my impression here wasn't that Harold is snidely, trying to get away with calling Abigail a cow. I think he is so far removed from everyone else in terms of their like religious awe of Abigail, that it doesn't even occur to him that it would be weird to compare her to a sacrificial cow of some kind.
Yeah, especially with a guy like Stu. Like, I think the most shocking part about this quote is not that Ralph feels uncomfortable, because I think it makes a lot of sense that Ralph, we've seen from the beginning, kind of really worships this woman, and that is like one of his defining characteristics. But Stu, just for Stu to feel the same thing, for Stu to hear that and be like, oh, whoa, hang on there, Harold, you're getting a little close to something that's going to make me uncomfortable, is a little shocking, right? Because Stu seemed like the type that, like, definitely awed by like the dreams and what was going on there, but not like fully bought into the, oh, that she's a literal, she's God.
Yeah. She's at least like a new prophet on the order of a Jesus figure. Yeah. No, it you're totally right. It does show how far things have moved along in terms of the way the characters regard her.
Yeah. And I think what we're doing here is actually very clever, and we'll return to this at the end of the week, I think, is we are setting up that maybe the reason why it was very important for Mother Abigail to exit the building. You know, like I think a lot of this is laying the groundwork for why, you know, whether it was literally the will of God or not, or the white, or whatever you want to call it, why her exiting the situation and the equation right now is actually good. Because if a person like Stu is starting to buy into, oh, this woman is not just a messenger from God, but God themselves, that may be a lean towards trouble, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good little note of something for us to think about going forward.
So they basically decide, the three of them, that they're going to go looking for her. So they take 3 short-wave radios and split up and go looking for Mother Abigail. We follow Harold, and I just want to say here at the beginning of this section that Harold's point of view just sucks, right? I mean, like, he's fully embraced the evil hatred role now and is just being nasty to everyone. Like, the one thing I'll say here is, like, he has motivation for being mad at Stu, right? It's stupid motivation, but like, it's motivation. But like, Ralph has never done a thing to Harold ever, like, at all. And he hates Ralph almost as much as Stu, and he insults Ralph in his, you know, his internal narration almost as much as he does Stu. And it's just completely illogical and shitty. And that's just Harold now.
Yeah, he's barely keeping a lid on his level of hatefulness and awfulness. And yeah, no, it's progressed, right? He wasn't like, I'm just thinking kind of sadly, honestly, about the first time we saw him and how I was so ready to be like, hey, this seems like a kid who's been through a lot. Maybe he's not having the best reaction to certain things, but you can kind of feel for him. He just lost his family, you know, and, you know, he did actually cry because his family was dead. It just took him a minute for it to kind of sink in. He's not a monster. And so now we've watched him sink further and further and really kind of taken ownership of being that monster. And that, to me, is actually sad to have seen.
No, it is really sad. It is. And I just can't get over the hypocrisy of Harold. I pulled this out because this really struck me while I was reading it. Stu is trying to communicate with Harold over the shortwave radio, and he says, Harold, calling Harold louder. You copy, Harold? Harold pointed his middle finger, your fuck finger, as the high school Neanderthals back in Algonquin had called it, at the walkie-talkie. I just, like, he loves to frame the world as like, those Neanderthals back in high school are flicking people off and calling it the fuck finger, right? And I was like, no, Harold, you're doing it. You just did that. like we're in your head right now, and you're the one referring to it as a fuck finger. And yet he's trying to place himself on this pedestal where he legitimately and earnestly believes he's just better than all these people, that all these people suck and I, Harold, am great. And yet he's continually doing the same exact thing that he's charging the low Neanderthal people of doing. And it's just like it's incredibly frustrating because I agree with you. I feel bad for Harold a lot. I feel bad for what Harold could have been. I think back to the guy, you know, out in his underwear mowing his lawn, crying and not sure what to do. And I was like, God, where did that guy go? Like, that guy has the potential of being someone actually great. And he's just gone now. And instead he's fully embraced every bad instinct, every bad tendency, and the hypocrisy is incredibly frustrating. And it's just like, man, fuck this guy. You just really grow to hate him. You really do.
Yeah, it's interesting because it invites you to think about stuff that I never really do normally think about. But it's like, what if you just were still really super mad about like some bully from 6th grade, and you were just like, someday I'm going to get revenge on that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't have that part of yourself that's like, hey man, that was a long time ago, and that was like he was a kid, like you were kids.
Yeah.
And you can let this go. Like, what if instead of that voice, you had a voice that was like, no, you can't let it go. That'll be a betrayal of 6th grade Matt / Scott / whoever is putting themselves in the position who needs justice. And it's like, well, you're not going to have justice. What you're doing is you're perpetuating the injustice by just pulling it along with you into the future, and like dumping your hate and anger out on the world, right? I don't know. It's interesting because you can see it happening. You can see how it could happen, right? And that's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, this whole thing is complicated by the very real and present evilness that is, as we'll see, literally pulling Harold towards him. But yeah, there's still moments where you just want to be like, "Hey, buddy, come on,
right?
Look at how these people like you. Look, like if you behave a certain way and people's response is, hey, I kind of like this guy. Isn't that like?" To Harold, that's vindication of, oh, all they want me to be is this fake person. It's like, no, they just they want you to be, when you're nice and friendly to people, they respond by being nice and friendly to you.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You were being a weirdo, Harold.
Yeah. Take some fucking responsibility. Yeah. I mean, so Harold we learn here, has brought his pistol with him, and he actually sees this as the moment, the perfect opportunity to take out Stu. He'll shoot him after they meet up while they're waiting for Ralph, and then he'll shoot Ralph too for good measure because, you know, why not? Yeah,
he probably deserves it for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, he doesn't do it, but you know, maybe later we will wish that he had, so that Harold will be you know, found out, right? But I thought this was a really interesting moment of tension writing wise, because I was like 90% sure that this wasn't going to be the moment where Harold would snap and shoot people. Like, the build up to the moment didn't really feel right.
Sure.
But that remaining 10% of thinking maybe he would do it made me really stressed out. It's kind of what I meant earlier, where it's like there's a kind of unpleasant edge to the stress in these chapters. Where it's like, oh, I really don't want Stu to get shot here. That would make me really sad and upset. And then it doesn't happen, but you still were like, oh my God, what are we doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's really great. And I think part of the uncomfortableness that you're feeling here is we cut over to Stu in this actual moment, right? We are with Harold as he decides that this is going to be the moment he kills Stu, and then we cut over to Stu. And so now we've created this situation of dramatic irony where we know Harold is here to murder Stu, and we're sitting here waiting for it from the perspective of a character who has no idea. And he's like adorably seeing Harold's like dejected nature and nervousness as disappointment at not finding Mother Abigail, at the plan that he came up with not working. And then of course we add on top of this whole thing, like, Stu is rethinking Harold in this moment. He's like saying, hey, maybe we were a little bit mean to him. Like, I love this paragraph here. He felt a sudden flush of guilt at the way he and Franny had treated Harold, as if his constant grin and his over-friendly way with people was some kind of camouflage. Had they ever really considered the idea that this guy might just be trying to turn over a new leaf? That he might be going at it a little strangely just because he had never tried to do such a thing before? And I love this, Matt, because No. Like, this is a moment where, like, we have this moment, just like with Franny last week, we have a character saying, oh, I feel bad at the way I'm treating this person. I wasn't giving him the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't assuming the best intentions of them, and I really should have been. But actually, Stu, no, you shouldn't have, because you and Franny were 100% right that this is some kind of camouflage, that this is just him putting on a mask. And it makes you sit back and wonder, okay, but what are we trying to do with this? And I think this ties into the thing you were talking about earlier about, so good. So go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is sort of a more specific, nailed down example of this theme of people getting in trouble for doing things that are absolutely driven by the better angels of their nature. Here we have Stu and Franny trying to resist their suspicion and be good, forgiving, Christ-like folks. And here that happens to be the wrong instinct, actually. And then later on, I'm just going to say now, like the other thread I was going to pull out is Larry's going to reject Nadine. He's going to be an honorable man, so not for the first time. That's too hard on him, but in a really important, big, difficult way, he's going to be the honorable man and make a hard choice. And we don't know how that's going to turn out, frankly, but we do get the feeling that it's going to turn out to be bad for somebody, maybe Larry specifically, I don't know, not turn out in his favor at least. So, it's just interesting how I don't know exactly where we're going, because we kind of need to know how everything resolves. But right now it seems like we have our characters trying really hard to be as good human beings as they can be, and it seems like the text is saying, and they were going to regret that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's broadly kind of showing the basic limitation of white-like behavior, for lack of a better phrase. Like that like the advantage that the evil has is that to behave correctly, to behave kindly, to behave earnestly puts you in situations where you can be screwed over by people that are just as bad as you felt that they were, but you felt that was the wrong way to act. I don't know. I'm just putting ideas out there.
I mean, that jiggled something loose in my brain, because I think I can articulate it in like two sentences the way all of the king good evil cosmology works. And it's basically the evil can harm good. You can never be so good that you're immune from evil, but evil always in the end destroys itself. And if you look at all of these stories we've covered, that's sort of what happens over and over. Is you've got stories where innocent children are kidnapped and brutally murdered. It's like they didn't do anything wrong. They were just kids. They were innocents. The evil did reach out and touch them, but the evil eventually destroys itself, and the good stands up against the evil, and that's instrumental in defeating the evil. Usually, it's not just a matter of it destroying itself. So I don't know. That was more than two sentences, but basically that's the structure of many of King's stories. So here, yeah, I mean, there's no rule that says if you're sufficiently Christ-like, you're just immune from evil. That's certainly not a thing in the Stephen King cosmos.
Yeah, and certainly not cause evil, but cause you to be vulnerable to evil. That like doing the right thing, quote unquote, the good thing, maybe exposing you to badness down the line, because that's what evil can take advantage of. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't, because you're absolutely right that in the end, hopefully, evil will take care of itself.
Yeah, well, I guess I halfway through articulating that, I decided to modify it to say, well, in all these stories, we do end up relying on some strong figure of goodness who's willing to stand against the evil, which I feel like is going to happen in this book at some point.
Sure.
For some reason.
I do think the important thing to note here, though, is that Stu's guilt makes him act differently, right? He's not just saying these things out loud. He's changing the way he acts. He invites Harold over for dinner, and he thanks him and asks to shake his hand and give him like a serious, hearty handshake. This, I think, has a visible effect on Harold, who, as you said, does not go through with his plans of murder in this moment. And this is interesting to talk about, because when we see Harold next, he like runs into his house, locks the door. He's like shaking. He's a mess. He's panicking. he goes over to his ledger, his diary, and frantically writes in it to soothe him, but he never really like goes into detail about why he didn't go through with it, right? It doesn't, we don't get enough of a window into Harold's head to understand that. It's described by the narrator as quote, some fraying cord of sanity stopped him at the last moment. But I like to think maybe it's as simple as, oh, this man was like genuinely nice to me. Like Stu in this moment was like genuinely charitable and nice to him. And Harold is so desperate for people to just, and people generally, but I think specific people, to be genuinely nice and charitable to him, that it just kind of threw him off to the point where he froze and he didn't know how to act, and I can't kill this person now. He just said nice things about me. It's interesting. The text never says that though.
Yeah, right. I mean, that sort of interaction, that sort of recognition was probably something that he craved for his whole life. And then, and then being given that, it's probably really hard for him to reject it. And I agree, that makes total sense. And I also agree that the text does not acknowledge any of this. It's just something that I think we're permitted to read between the lines if we want.
Yeah.
But he's just avoiding thinking about it. It's almost like he's trying to sort of flush out all of that feeling of confusion with his sort of comfortable feeling of hate and loathing.
He relishes in the hate as seen by him writing in the ledger, which presumably is just chock full of shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do want to just point out the detail where he calls, as he's thinking about Stu, he calls him a betraying cracker, which is like, what? Harold, what are you even talking about? Like you're white, Harold. Like I just, it's just like he's just throwing anything at the wall at this point. You know, like I need to come up with insults for him, and here's one. This one will do for me.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, as long as I get to hate him. No, it's funny. You're right.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, Franny forgot to close the door to the basement when she left, and Harold notices this immediately, along with a small pile of dirt that she knocked into the basement while climbing through the window. I just want to, the second that King like kind of pauses to note that she kicks a little dirt into the basement, were you immediately like, oh fuck, he's gonna notice that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that I was actually leaning toward like, well, maybe she's just going to get caught in the house. But then, that obviously didn't happen. So.
Mm-hmm. So Harold now knows that someone's been in his house and is completely outraged by this act of betrayal, despite, doing the same thing to Franny, besides that.
Right. Yeah.
Just how dare someone break into my personal effects and look through my stuff without my permission? Oh wait, I did that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to me because, like, you referred to Harold as an incel, starting from much earlier, and it's like this sort of hypocrisy, I think, is central to the sort of incel dynamic, where it's like it's a refusal to be self-aware enough to notice that you're doing exactly the same things that you're hating others for doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's 100%. So I think it's worth pointing out here that Harold, like the thing we see in this moment is like, he's like, do I need to leave? Do I need to move? Do I need to move my ledger? Do I need to hide it? Should I bury it somewhere? Should I burn it? And he can't do any of these things. He needs to keep it right next to him because he's grown to love this writing of his. And I love what he says about the writing. He put it under his pillow along with his Smith & Wesson revolver, thinking he should burn it, knowing he never could. The best writing he had ever done in his life was between its covers, the only writing that had ever come as a result of belief and personal commitment. I find this so fascinating because King tends to write about the power of writing so elegantly and beautifully, right? Because King, more than anyone, just about recognizes like the power of good writing, the transportative power of crafting sentence and story specifically, but just generally the writing is this incredibly powerful tool, and it's beautiful, and this act of creation is absolutely beautiful, but it can have a dark side too, and I think it's really fascinating to see like the dark side of writing and how Harold is kind of fully committed to this particular kind of writing, which is interesting because except for one little tiny passage, the book has not shown us a bit of what Harold's ledger actually looks like.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing to me is, he thinks of it as the best thing ever. And it's like, it's probably just total madness. And
yeah, it's rambling nonsense.
Right. If we ever do get to see it, it's going to turn out to be just a nightmare of contradiction and and probably not his magnum opus.
Yeah, I do like how it does reflect the king sentiment of the most important thing in your writing is honesty, right? Like, so even Harold incorrectly is saying this is his, but like the only writing that has come as a result of belief and personal commitment, so like this is, to Harold, this is his most honest writing. Of course, I think that's total bullshit, but
yeah, no, it's an interesting point about it being, potentially dangerous, because I sometimes think of writing as like a way of talking to yourself via the medium of having a piece of paper to write on. And that can be productive, but I think it can absolutely be counterproductive if, the framework of this conversation that you're having with yourself is one where you're, pushing yourself in a bad direction, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we have like to go back to the incel examples, like these are people who, sit in message boards all day and talk to each other and kind of, like extreme, like make each other more extreme, like they work on each other and escalate and escalate and escalate. Harold does not have that, right? Like Harold does not, like there's no extremist pipeline into inceldom for Harold that is, being manipulated and fed this by other people. He's doing it himself. And I think one of the big ways in which he's doing that is, as you said, the conversations he's having with himself, the writing that he's doing. Like he's he's made his own incel pipeline in his stupid ledger that like he's just, it's this feedback loop.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I jokingly referred to it as like a manifesto when we first heard about it. And it's like, it really reminds me of the Unabomber manifesto, or really any other manifesto, where you have kind of a lone person who just writes and writes and writes, and they construct in isolation and without any criticism or feedback an entire worldview. And then, they're presumably reading over their own writings and sort of reinforcing this towering structure of their own beliefs and feeding on it and then adding to it. And so, yeah, no, I think that's exactly what's happening here.
Yeah. All right, so we cut from this over to the following day, and we learned the next day's search party has no more luck than the one before it. Mother Abigail is still missing, and her power as a symbol and both a literal and figurative voice of God is beginning to be discussed by our characters here. And once again, we see that Glenn is taking kind of a lead with these heavy philosophical discussions. I do like this little note before we get into the conversation proper here, Matt. Glenn says, "I can't read the future, Fran." And in the lamplight, his face looked old and worn, the face perhaps of a failed magician. I found that particular description to be really fascinating. It just stood out to me. It was like the face of a failed magician. Interesting.
That's great. That's so great. Yeah, I think. Well, I just love what we're doing with Glenn. I'll just say that, and I'll riff on that more later.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic here is that Glenn has been preaching a certain thing forever and ever and ever, and the existence of Mother Abigail and the dreams and all these things have really kind of undermined in himself his belief system. So this idea of like the face of a failed magician is that you were showing one particular trick. It's like, imagine the idea of you're a magician that is like really good at performing a particular trick, and then someone comes and says, no, actually magic is real. Oh wait, they did a whole movie about that. It's called The Prestige. Oh,
okay. Yeah. I mean, the metaphor I was going to go for was a lot less, was a lot more direct, and just saying like if you're, like a chemistry professor, and then one day somebody's like, yeah, chemistry is not real. It doesn't work. We've sure. proven it. You would be kind of crestfallen because you've spent your whole life sort of living by and teaching this discipline, which is in fact not true.
Yeah. I like that. So Glenn takes a shot this time, and it's not at technology itself, like the monologue he went on earlier in the book, but this time he's being a little bit broader, a little bit bigger. It's not technology, but it's the thing underlying technology. He's taking a shot at rationalism. If this beat sounds familiar, that's because it very much is, and I'm pretty sure we had a very similar discussion to the one we're about to have during, I believe it was Insomnia, where we talked about rationalism as a thing that was destructive in the King universe. But here, Glenn defines rationalism as the idea that we can ever understand anything about the state of being. He says it's a death trip. It always has been. And so the underlying cause of all the destruction, death, and everything, and everything is rationalism. And Matt, I know you want to talk about this.
Yeah, you definitely want to address this as the resident rationalist. And mainly just to say, like, in this context, Glenn has a point. And you know, first of all, the flavor of rationalism that Glenn is addressing is a very particular thing, and not really the perspective that I endorse. There's been a lot of rationalisms throughout history, which are basically different animals entirely.
Sure.
Old school rationalism says that everything can be understood through analysis and reason, and thusly controlled through analysis and reason. And therefore, we can make a perfect society. We can make a perfect man through rational investigation and rational design of mechanisms and societies. This is very much what the Soviet Union was going for, actually. And this perspective is, you know, if you'll forgive me, like the One Ring, where
you did it.
The ring is a tool of incredible power, and it can allow you to exert your will upon the world, just like the mindset and attitude of rationalism. But the temptation of such immense power is inevitably corrupting and destructive. You know, it promises power, it promises all of these treasures, but tends to deliver nightmares. And, you know, it's a death trip, like Glenn says.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I think he, you know, insofar as he's using a term that means a specific thing, it's like, yeah, that's I especially when you're confronted with, like, you know, a prophet who has credible proof of being a prophet, you're like, I'm going to abandon the ways of rationality. But I mean, I think, you know, the way that you avoid falling to the prey of the One Ring is to say, you know, we should all have a healthy sense of humility about our own intellect and our own moral fortitude, and like that's always the path to not doing horrible things, is just to be like, okay, you know, let me not think that I'm so awesome that I deserve to have this amount of power and control, right? And I don't mean that literally just for the One Ring. I mean that, like, for everything, you know. That's
I like this. I like this a lot, and I like what you said about, you know, it's not just the understanding of a state of being, it's the belief that once we understand it, we can control it. That is the actual mistake being made here. Because I agree with you, like the idea that I want to understand as much as I can about the world, and I think I think one of the things that this book is directly saying, and perhaps we could say that King is saying largely via, you know, his combined works of his universe, is that there are things in this world that we just are never going to be able to fully understand. Like there is magic in this world. There are powers. There are things beyond explanation. And the idea that we can think to understand and control those things. I mean, remember, one of the things that the old people in the Dark Tower series did was they looked at the magic of the beams and they said, I think we can recreate that. I think we can one up that. We understand technology. We understand these things. Let's build these guardians, and we can technologically enhance these things, and that stuff failed, and it resulted in their destruction, and almost at the end of the day, the destruction of the tower itself. So, like, magic as it exists in this world is an inherently irrational thing that cannot be controlled, cannot be fully understood. And the better we understand our inability to understand, the better we will all be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that totally. Couldn't have said it better.
But Here's the next thing, because he also talks about Flag, and he says here, Mother Abigail calls him the devil's imp. Maybe he's just the last magician of irrational thought, gathering the tools of technology against us. And maybe there's something more, something darker. I only know that he is, and I no longer think that sociology or psychology or any other ology will put an end to him. I think only white magic will do that. So I love this idea that like Glenn is going through this transformation, and he's like, oh, we're not going to be able to logic our way out of this thing. We're not going to be able to rationally way out of this thing. We're going to have to rely on some power greater than ourselves. But what do you think of the idea of Flag being the last magician of rational thought?
Well, this is my one real hang up with this whole bit, is describing Flag as rational, even in this sense, even in this specific narrow sense that Glenn has defined. I don't really see how Flag has been portrayed as a rational. he just seems like kind of a force of chaos. I mean, the only thing that he's doing that seems rational according to that specific definition is like he has set up his city in a way that is structured and ordered. And we kind of remarked on how surprised we were that far from being a place of, you know, sin and excess, he had set up his Las Vegas as a place of like order and tyranny. Mm-hmm. But that's all I got, you know. Other than that, he seems pretty chaotic and not exactly interested in, you know, reasoning things out. I think that's what King is going for here. That combined with the idea of, you know, the tools of technology. I do think there are times when King uses rationality and technology interchangeably. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing we know Flag is doing is he's like gathering the tools, the tools of war, I guess, are being gathered by Flag. And so like he's a symbol of the technological power of pre-plague America. So I think that's what we're doing here, because I agree with you. Like his behavior in and of itself doesn't seem particularly rational. And he is also representative of the same kind of ununderstandable power that exists. You know, like there is great good in this world, great ununderstandable good, but there's also ununderstandable evil as well. Mm-hmm. So I guess one thing I'm trying to shove into my brain is the idea that this kind of rationalism does not preclude being insane. Sure. You normally think of being insane and being rational as being like literally diametrically opposed, but like, sure. But like you could also argue like, hey, the people who were insane enough to make the killer virus and then shoot people who were trying to spread warnings about the killer virus, they were acting from a sort of basis of rationality. But they were also clearly insane at the same time. I agree. I think your One Ring metaphor here is really wonderful, actually, because I think it gets down to the meat of what we're saying here, that this idea of that it leads to a certain quest for power and control that is ultimately destructive. I mean, that's why we made the virus in the first place, right? America made the virus out of this I guess you could call it insanely rational idea that if we have this weapon to wield, we could control the world. Yes, I love that. Yes, because you know the one I think the One Ring as just a general metaphor created by Tolkien is like the best metaphor ever, because it's a perfect way of thinking about the corrupting influence of power, because you're like, you want to say like, well, why shouldn't I use this thing which will give me the ability to exert my will over the world? Like I want to exert my will over the world. Yeah, I'm good. My will is good. Yeah. I mean, the way I live my life is I work a job so I can earn money, and then I use the money to exert my will on the world, so I can have a nice house and take care of my kids. That's me exerting my will on the world. So why shouldn't I do? I want more of that. I want to exert my will more, and then things will be better because I'll have more control and more power. And obviously I should want more power. And it's like that's the drug. That's the danger, where it's like, no, first of all, no, that's not going to like give you any more fulfillment or anything good. And also we've just seen over and over, it just inexorably leads in this direction where you depart the path of righteousness pretty directly. If that's your main driver, like more power, that always leads in bad directions.
No, I like that a lot. All right, so I think that's all on this particular bit. I think we covered it for quite a while. So you ready to move on?
Yeah.
So this chapter ends with the return of Kojak the dog, who has apparently trekked all the way to Boulder all on his own. I really love this for a few reasons, Matt. I think this kind of serves to reinforce Glenn's changing concept of belief. Like, you could argue, like, the way this whole thing is structured, you could argue Glenn has this great speech about how, like, we need to accept their irrational, we need to embrace the white and these things beyond our understanding, and then is rewarded for putting his faith in the white by getting his doggy back. It also shows generally, like, it's the power of God in that this animal was able to trek all the way across the country on his own, and maybe also gives us a little bit of confidence that Mother Abigail might survive out there in the wilderness if this poor dog can. So a lot of stuff going on here with this Kojak return. What did you think of it?
It's great. I found it really moving, actually, like emotionally. And just, I'll say again here, I love the direction that we're taking Glenn, who started out as this extremely cynical, jaded, detached character. I almost borderline disliked him, or at least I didn't find him particularly, like, warm and likable when we first met him. And his reaction to the end of the world was like to give Stu this sociology lecture, and and now we're taking this character and we're hitting him with these tests of faith and loyal dogs, and really hammering this guy into a different shape, really creating a fascinating transformation in this character.
Yeah, no, you're so right. It's really great. I mean, I remember having this really shocked feeling when one of our listeners was like, "Hey, Glenn was kind of an asshole in this early part of the book," and I was like, "Yeah, he was," and I was really torn because I didn't remember having that feeling about him when reading the book, and this is starting to be the Glenn that I recognize more, a guy that's, like, kind of had his lunch served to him, had a very, very strong and certain view of humanity and the world, and is kind of having that, like, thrown in his face in a lot of ways.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think he previously came across as kind of snide and sarcastic, and there was definitely kind of a lot of, like, talking down to Stu, I think, which is really interesting, because now they're much more on a level, and Stu will just, like, give him shit, and they clearly respect and like each other. Whereas before,
I love that he calls him Baldy.
yeah, that was my favorite is him calling him Baldy, and then, like, Glenn clearly doesn't like it, but at the same time, at a certain point, like, having your friend call you a nickname you don't like is also sort of a sign that you're really friends,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great.
So the last bit of this chapter is an interlude from the perspective of Kojak himself, as the chapter, kind of comes full circle. I really love the imagery here. Again, we started with this dream that Mother Abigail was having, where she was back at Hempstead Home, and she was being surrounded by wolves that surrounded her and attacked her, and she woke up right as the wolves are about to attack. And here at the end of the chapter, we recreate that same thing. We have Kojak here at Hempstead Home, surrounded by wolves. They attack him, and Kojak just fucking kicks all their asses, man. He just owns these wolves. This dog is great. He's injured, of course, but he lives, and it's so good. It's such a great kind of full circle feeling. Like, the beginning of the chapter fills you with so much doubt, but the end of the chapter is like, oh no, the good guys can win. Look what the power of good can do here.
Yeah, I love this shit. Kojak fighting the wolves from Kojak's perspective, and sort of emphasizing the animal perspective on things is just my whole jam.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. Writing from the perspective of the animals is always so fun. One of our favorite interludes in the other book, Boredom, we did was the perspective from a dog, which is just absolutely delightful. This is absolutely delightful as well. I love all the detail of it. We're not going to go into it because it'll take too long, but there's just a lot of fun. Oh, I wonder what an animal would think of this moments that King gets to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, we end the chapter on this. Even when he was an old dog, and Kojak lived another 16 years, long after Glenn Bateman died, those scars would pain and throb on wet days. It's like, fuck you. I mean, I know Glenn's gonna die eventually, right? He's not gonna live forever. But now we have a timeline on Glenn's death here.
We have a timeline, and dogs don't usually live all that long, so just 16 more years of a dog's life.
Yeah. And long after Glenn Bateman died. So Glenn could die tomorrow.
Yeah, Glenn could die any day now, really.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. God damn it, Stephen.
Yep.
All right, we move on to chapter 53. We begin our chapter with another ad hoc committee meeting and more committee meeting minutes. Matt, did you ever think when you opened up this here book that you'd be in so many committee meetings?
I honestly did not.
How are they working for you? Are they still working okay?
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm not enjoying the meetings. It's a very different kind of writing, but also you're still kind of hanging on what's happening, right? It's not just like it's dramatic, right? We've got a lot of dramatic stuff happening. There's a ton of stuff to get through in this meeting, and a lot of it is really emotional content, actually. So this is hardly just like your normal town hall meeting.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. So this particular closed session meeting is to talk about some last minute things in preparation for the big community meeting. There's a few things I want to note here. The first is that they're waiting till they're an actual formal democratically elected committee with authority to actually vote on the discussion of spies. So they're like, which is a sensible thing to do. Maybe we should have authority over this community before we ask people to potentially go to their death to spy on our enemy. Pretty good.
Yeah.
They're also here deciding what they're going to put on the agenda of the meeting. And two of those things are getting a group together, like a formal get the power back on committee to actually organize and work to restore power. And then also a formal search party committee that will be led by none other than Harold Lauder. Yikes.
I was thinking about this. Like if I were in their position and I was skeptical of Harold, then I would actually try to keep Harold busy somewhere peripheral. So like I would give him a lot of work to do so that he was busy and maybe even felt like he was important, but kind of on the edge of things. So not that's what
this is to you?
I don't think that's what they're trying to do. No, I don't actually. But that is what I would try to do.
I think it's so interesting because like they basically say like, we have to give this committee to him because it was his idea originally. And if we don't do that, his feelings will be hurt. And Nick's like, I think this is a bad idea. But that's, I feel like I'm being unduly influenced because I just don't like Harold, which is again, the same beat you were talking about, right? Where like these people don't feel good about this guy, but they're like, their better nature gets in their way. And so he's like, I rescind my objection to this whole thing, even though Nick, you were right, Nick, you were right. So yeah. King is really laying it on thick, this shadow that exists over Harold, and we don't even know like what that means or where it's going to go, but it's just here.
Yeah.
So from here, we cut over to the big meeting itself. We start off in the head of Larry Underwood, who is incredibly nervous about this whole thing and contemplates falling into his old habits and just bailing, just getting out and ditching everyone and leaving them for the responsibility. I really love this little line here as well. There were 580 people here, and most of them didn't have any idea that Larry Underwood wasn't no nice guy, or that the first person Larry Underwood had attempted to take care of after the epidemic had died of a drug overdose, which is just like, oh, Larry, oh man.
Yeah. I mean, it's the stuff that the judge was talking about, where his previous failures stay with him, and they're making him, humble and more thoughtful, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think to revise something we talked about a while ago, it's not necessarily that like Larry, what we were saying with Larry was that the world doesn't need nice guys, it needs people like Larry. I think what we were actually trying to say is how often are people that loudly proclaim that they're nice guys actually nice guys, right? Like I feel like an actual nice guy would not like be so confident and assured of how nice of a guy they are. They would be
Right.
more like Larry, who constantly doubts, am I a nice guy? Am I doing the right thing? In fact, sometimes I feel like I'm not a nice guy and I need to be working on that. Like that, not only is that the type of person you want as a leader, like Judge said, but I think that's just an actual reflection of what an actual good person would be like.
Yeah, I agree.
So then Stu gets on the stage and everyone starts clapping, and I love, God, there's so many great moments and really, as you said, really emotional moments here. Everyone starts clapping and Larry decides that it's not about Stu himself, it's about us. I love the writing here. We're applauding ourselves, Larry thought. We're applauding the fact that we're here, alive, together. Maybe we're saying hello to the group self again. I don't know. Hello, Boulder. Finally. Good to be here. Great to be alive. I love all that. So I love the idea of we're applauding the fact that we're here. We're saying hello to the group self again. It's wonderful.
Yeah. I think it was really fun watching this from Larry's perspective, mostly. Out of all the characters that we could be viewing this scene from, somehow it feels right that we're seeing it from from Larry's perspective.
I totally agree. And this is one of those things that I love about writing, because King could have constructed this scene in every event of the plot that happens in this scene from infinity angles, right? He could have done it from any perspective he wanted. He could have told it in any way, and the events of the scene could have remained the same. Mm-hmm. But he makes these choices. And this is what I love about talking about this stuff. Choosing to frame this from Larry's perspective is so good, because not only does it lead into what's going to happen with Larry and Nadine at the end of the chapter, but it does offer us a perspective and an angle on this thing we would not have gotten from anyone else. And you're right that it just feels correct. It just feels right.
Yeah, right. This is one of those notes where it's like I'm always most interested in seeing how Larry is sort of progressing. Mm-hmm. So like if it were from Franny or Stu's perspective or even Nick's, like you kind of know how they're going to take certain things, but Larry is a character where we want to check on him because we're not quite sure where he is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my feeling about Larry. Anyway.
Yeah, and I love, like, we get to see Stu and Franny's reaction and their feelings on the whole thing still, in the fact that we cut to them after this and kind of see them discussing it and then flash back. But King recognizes that in the moment, the first time the readers are seeing this is the right point of view. And he's right. I mean, he's just correct. Right. This is the kind of thing that you wonder in the actual creation. Like, when he imagined the scene, did he immediately go, oh, it's got to be Larry? Or did he kind of have to feel his way to that? You know, I just don't know. It's one of those fascinating things about the process of creation. When does that particular choice, that structural, point of view choice come to an author? I don't know.
Yeah, I would guess that he felt like, God, it has to be Larry. But I don't know how much confidence I'd put on that guess.
I do think you're right. But yeah, we'll never know for sure.
Yeah.
So just to point out that Stu is just great on stage, right? He's funny, he's articulate, he's just a little bit of self-deprecating and like the fun kind that makes everyone laugh and be a little bit more comfortable with you. He's just great. I love Stu. Yeah.
I mean, we haven't quite seen this side of him. It's funny because when we first met him, he was the definition of laconic, and now he's, just this likable, talkative guy, actually. It's very fun to watch.
It's interesting because he is the character that I think the book has focused on the least as far as like what an arc would be, right? Like he's I'm not saying that Stu has not changed and been changed by the experience, but there was never a lot of tension in who Stu is going to end up being. Like with other characters like Larry.
Yeah, I agree.
We have to talk about this moment, though, where Stu asks everyone to sing the national anthem. And I think this is great. I love this scene so much. And the thing that I love about it is it's not about patriotism, right? We're not singing the national anthem to be patriotic. And it's not the theme or the tone of the moment is not patriotic. It's about mourning. They're about to pass the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights again. They're about to pass all these things again. They're going to try to establish this new world with the foundations of America, but they're singing the national anthem as kind of an ode to an America that is gone. And it's this incredibly actually sad moment for everyone. I love what Larry says about it. Larry joined in the singing too, and when it was done and the applause rolled out once more, he was crying a bit himself. Rita was gone. Alice Underwood was gone. New York was gone. America was gone. Even if they could defeat Randall Flagg, whatever they might make would never be the same as the world of dark streets and bright dreams. I love that to death. I think it's so, like, just that sentence, the world of dark streets and bright dreams.
Mm-hmm.
That's fucking America, man. Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah, that really nails down like what I've been feeling about how the book wants us to feel kind of two different ways about our country. Mm-hmm. It's man, it was a hell of a thing, but it also bred the seeds of its own destruction. You know, it was flawed, but it was beautiful. It was ultimately something worth mourning. Yeah,
definitely. And so that this is an ode to that lost America. And then our story continues with you know, they pass everything they wanted to at the meeting, but Harold does stand up and throw a curveball, Matt, because instead of having separate people each nominate and then second one of the ad hoc committee members as the permanent members of the council that they had planned to do, Harold just stands up and takes care of it all. He just says, I vote that we make the ad hoc committee the permanent committee now. And Stu's reaction to this is really interesting. He planned this, Stu thought. These people are going to elect us, but it's Harold they'll remember. Still, he got to the root of the thing in a way none of us even thought of. Not even Glenn. It was pretty damn near a stroke of genius. So why should he be upset? Was he jealous, maybe? Was his good resolutions about Harold made only that day, before yesterday, already going to the boards? So I guess the question I have for you here, Matt, is what's Harold's play here? Why do this?
Well, I'm obviously not sure about this, but one good way to fuck somebody up is to hand them power along with an impossible situation. And then when they inevitably fail as intended, you blame them for failing, and then you take power yourself. Or you don't even have to take power yourself if your goal was just to make them look bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly true. It doesn't quite line up with what we've been told Harold's plan is, though, right? Like, Harold's plan seems to be, I'm going to sneak up on Stu, I'm going to shoot him, and then I'm going to run away to Vegas. That's what I'm going to do. That's my plan. Like, what? It's just, what's going on?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, if he is going to run away to Vegas, then at least he'll know who the people in power are, or it could be, the key could be more like what Stu said, where like people are going to remember that Harold was the one who proposed this, and so what does that mean? Like Harold gets some kind of credit, even though, like he gets some role as being a guy who tapped them for power, which means he gets some power. I don't know. It doesn't really jive with what we have been told his intentions are. So I don't know.
Yeah. And I think the other thing it does is just remind us again of Harold's competence. Like he thought of this and none of them thought of this. None of them thought of doing it this way, which is actually just the simplest and easiest way to handle this. And then we learn later in the meeting that Harold was incredibly well prepared for this thing, that they the idea of making these two groups of people, and Harold said, we should have a rule in these groups that for every X number of people that join our community, the members of these groups should go up by one. And so he's remarkably well prepared for this thing. And like whatever he's playing at, we don't know. It's just a reminder, wait, this guy's smart and he's super competent. And it's like, Harold, what are you doing? Like, think of how good of an asset you could actually be for this community. It's like, he's just like playing at being really good at this and it's just like, this is so stupid. Look, I can do this. It's so easy. It's so stupid. Yeah. Like, this is a really obscure reference, but I just watched the movie The Other Guys. I rewatched The Other Guys the other day. Which is a very funny Will Ferrell movie. Mark Wahlberg's in it. And there's a scene where Mark Wahlberg says, we all learned how to ballet dance to make fun of all the losers ballet dancing. And then he does like super good ballet dancing. And then it's like, at some point you're just like doing the thing that's really, it's just absurd. And that to me is what Harold's doing. He's doing ballet here. He's like, to prove how stupid this whole thing is, he's just being really good at it. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense.
That's great. Yeah. No, you're right. It is very frustrating, and also makes him feel formidable, like you said.
Yeah. So the rest of the meeting goes off without a hitch until talks turn to Mother Abigail herself rather. And I think this is the part where we kind of talk about maybe why it was actually necessary for her to leave, because everyone kind of talks about her as this saint almost. I love what Stu says here. When taken together, discussions reminded Stu uncomfortably of a wake. It told him that in their hearts they had already come halfway to giving her up. If she did return now, Abby Fremantle would find herself welcomed, still sought after, still listened to, but she would also find, Stu thought, that her position was subtly changed. If a showdown between her and the Free Zone Committee came, it was no longer a foregone conclusion that she would win, veto power or not. And so this is, to me, the book demonstrating that, oh, this is exactly why she needed to leave. Because just the fact that, I think it says later in this same paragraph, the community went on without her and survived without her. She left and the community stayed. And it's like, oh, we don't need her to survive. And that is good. They needed to learn that lesson, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's why. I mean, I think that's King trying to illustrate exactly why she had to walk out her door into the wilderness.
Yeah, that's interesting, because they might have very well all just scattered to the winds because the magical woman who summoned them to her with dreams departed. But no, they all chose to stay and form their society without her, and maybe she'll come back, maybe not.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like, maybe the idea that Mother Abigail would wield this sort of temporal power was what was actually offensive to God, and that's why God wanted her to abandon the town, because he didn't want her to have this sort of like political power.
Sure.
I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, maybe. So after the meeting, Franny and Stu are heading home, still mourning America. And this, Matt, is when Stu chooses to tell a story of back when he was working at the gas station that we met him at. The time he met Jim Morrison filling up his car at that very gas station. Jim Morrison, who was definitely already dead at the time, who died in Paris, France. Matt, got any theories on why King chose to put this part in this moment in the story?
I have no fucking clue, Scott. I have the least amount of clue of maybe anything ever on the entire show. What is this?
I love that because I think so. I have a theory, and I'm gonna explain it to you, and I don't know how good it is, but so I mean, I guess the background here, folks, if you don't know, Jim Morrison died of probably a heroin overdose in Paris. The weird thing around his death is that there was no autopsy or any kind of investigation done. That he supposedly was found in a bathtub. And they said heart attack caused by heroin overdose, and that's it. And then there were all these weird things where there were various, different stories about, actually, no, he didn't die in a bathtub. He died in a club, in the bathroom of a club, and some other people corroborate it. It's this whole thing. So anytime there's any kind of mystery around a death, the things that start piping up are, oh, he's not actually dead, just like Elvis, just absurd stories about, oh, this person didn't actually die, and that's where this whole story comes from. But the thing I like about it is, here was an event that happened to Stu that was an irrational, inexplicable magic, I guess, for the lack of a better phrase, event. And in his life, he looked at that and just kind of wrote it off, because he was like, that can't be like that. I must have been wrong. It was probably just someone that really looked like Jim Morrison. There's no way that happened. He's definitely dead. Nothing magical about this. Wrote it off. And now he's in this world where he had these dreams, where there's this dark man, and there's this magical woman who is possibly a mouthpiece of God himself. And he's looking at this thing, and he's recontextualizing this thing that happened to him. And I think this is really interesting, because I think in the world, there are people like Mother Abigail that are staunch, faithful believers in whatever spirituality or religion they choose to believe in. There are people that are staunch atheists that do not believe in anything of that type. I think the reality is most people are somewhere in between those two poles, right? And I think that the thing that we're seeing with Stu here is that he's a person that experienced something magical and inexplicable in his life already, and he didn't. He wrote it off until he has this other experience, and we kind of see him therefore in a new light as a person who maybe already was kind of primed to accept these kind of things. Not entirely, but like we understand why he could be easily swayed by this greater power because he's already experienced something else that beggared belief.
Huh.
That's my interpretation of why we're doing this now.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to process that. That's not really what I would have thought of on my own, but I definitely think there's something there. As long as it's not, you know, I suspect we're not going in the direction where like Jim Morrison is going to show up, you know.
No.
I didn't think we were going to do that. I did think it was more along the lines of what you're saying, where it's like this is saying something about Stu and about the inexplicable and the impossible crossing our paths.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Did you know the whole Elvis is alive thing was like started from one tabloid story, and then like every time a tabloid like had nothing to print, they would just resuscitate the Elvis is alive story, and that's like the whole thing.
It's exhausting.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah, that's really annoying.
Yeah, fucking ridiculous.
Makes sense.
Anyway, Jim Morrison definitely dead.
If you say so, Scott.
Dead a long time ago. So from here we cut over to Larry and Lucy heading home from the meeting as well, where they find themselves confronted by Nadine. She wants to talk to Larry right now, and I think there's something really heartbreaking about this, where Lucy like immediately is like, "Up, here we go. I've lost," and she kind of storms off crying because she knows Larry's not going to pick her, and I love that choice in the scene because I think it helps, you know, really cause you, the reader, to question which way Larry's going to go as well. Like you want to know that he's going to say no and go back with Lucy. Like you want that to be the truth, but she's so convinced otherwise that you kind of are a little bit too. And I think that's really, really great.
Yeah, it pushes us in that direction. And the text definitely does its best to make us feel like it's very likely that he's going to be seduced here.
Yeah. Yeah. But Larry has changed, though, Matt. He has changed. And although Nadine begs him to just bang her right there out in public, he says no. He says no. And I find the setup of this exchange really fascinating here because there's so many things happening at the same time here. It is, for Larry, a moment of triumph, right? A moment where the old Larry officially loses and the new Larry wins. He has rejected the person that he was before and embraces this new version of himself by doing I guess the right thing in this moment. But for Nadine, this whole scene is her last ditch effort to resist the pull of Randall Flagg. She's like, I'm gonna lose, and the only way to stop this is if you have sex with me right now, Larry, and then I will be damaged goods. He won't want me anymore, and therefore I will be free of his influence. And so Larry's triumph is Nadine's moment of her final failure in a lot of ways, and I that's so deliciously complicated. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's great because we want Larry to resist, and the fact that he, you know, comes so god dang close to breaking is just such an electric moment, and we're so glad that he holds out. But at the same time, we know there's going to be a cost to this because basically Nadine is Flagg's now. Yeah, and what exactly the consequences will be, we don't know, but not going to be good. You know, part of me wants to say this is all about something like locus of control. Like Larry's whole thing has been actually taking on an internal locus of control instead of being like, well, I guess I'm not a nice guy, fine, you know, letting the world tell him what kind of a guy he is. He instead he has chosen to be like, well, okay, I've done some bad stuff, I'm gonna try really hard day by day, despite it going kind of against my nature, I'm gonna try to be a good guy. And Nadine is basically like, I am the corpse bride, and like telling herself this story, and she's like, Larry, you have to be the one to save me. And Larry's like, no, I'm not. I don't have to do that. I'm not obligated to do that. She's like, fine, then I will be with my dark love. And it's like, Nadine, just don't.
Yeah, don't do that.
Just don't do it. Like shut up. And like I really think that's kind of like contrasting these two characters specifically against each other. It really becomes obvious that like Nadine, I mean, I get that there's magic in the story, but I feel like that's kind of abdicating a little bit more responsibility.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. I agree with you. Like we need to allow these characters to have their own agency. And so like, yes, I understand the allure and the pull of Flag is a lot for Nadine, but she is at the end of the day making her own choices.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And I think you're right. The thing I love about this, I love the way King writes the scene from Larry's perspective. This line right here, I have to go home. He said, I'm sorry. You'll have to work it out on your own, Nadine. Work it out on your own. Weren't they the words he had been using to people in one form or another all his life? Why did they have to rise up this way when he knew he was right and still catch him and twist him and make him doubt himself? You know, like this way in which King has crafted the scene in which Larry is doing the thing that he would always do, only this time it's the right thing. Like this time to say like, no, this is your problem. You have to deal with it. I'm getting the hell out of here. He's running away from her. Right. But this time it is actually the right decision. And this is the thing about being a good person, is that sometimes the right decision feels wrong.
Yeah.
Like because it feels like he's doing the same thing over again. But in this particular case, no, he's not actually.
Right. Sometimes the right decision is to break somebody's heart. You know, it's being a good person does not mean that you're free from having to suffer. If in fact the opposite, you could say.
Yeah. I love the writing here that kind of says that most perfectly to me is like, at last he knew how you pay off for not being no nice guy, never clear about your own motivations, never able to weigh hurt against help except by rule of thumb, never able to get rid of the sour taste of doubt in your mouth. And I don't think that's not being a nice guy. I think that is being a nice guy, actually. Like this idea of self-doubt, of caring enough about the way your choices affect other people that you have doubt over whether the choices you're making are good ones or not, is to me the sign of a good person, not a bad person.
Yeah, I agree. Love that.
And then in the middle of him thinking that, when he hears the boot heels again, you know, like his head jerked up, his eyes widened until they seemed to bulge from his face. The wind had picked up again. It made a strange hooting sound in some empty doorway, and farther along he thought he could hear boot heels pacing off into the night, run down boot heels somewhere in the foothills, coming to him on the chilly draft of this early morning breeze. Dirty boot heels clocking their way into the grave of the West. That's so good, man. It's like Flag was like sitting here in the darkness waiting for Larry to make the wrong choice and be like, I knew it. Here I am. Come with me.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, that's just the perfect juxtaposition for this moment.
It's so good.
I love that everybody kind of has their own way of dealing of interacting with Flag, you could say, and that Larry's is always this like very subtle, like Larry doesn't have these psychic battles with Flag the way other people do. He just has this hint of a sound wafting on the breeze. That's this
idea that evil, that badness is always just there, just around you, and just right around the corner, that a good breeze will bring it right back to you. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So Larry returns to Lucy, who is overjoyed that Larry did the right thing. And I think this is the moment where we get to feel good too, right? She's so happy. And obviously this is still weighing on him. Like he just had this Rubicon moment and he's dealing with it as best he can. But it's a great little scene.
Yeah. We get to know Lucy a little bit better because we get kind of an internal POV from Lucy, and I end up liking her quite a bit, actually.
I like her a lot too. We haven't talked much about her, but this idea that like she's kind of internalized this idea that like men are going to reject her, like,
Mhm.
and like that's just going to happen to her. And it's so great to see her not have to go through with that.
Yeah. For some reason, Nadine's like totally unwarranted superiority toward Lucy made me like Lucy even more.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. Like, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but there's a quote from Nadine that I pulled out here. That I'll read it now, and then we can jump back and talk about Nadine some more. But
Okay.
She says, "When all the choices have been taken away, what do? You choose what's left. You choose whatever dark adventure was meant for you. You let Larry have a stupid little twist of tail with her tight pants and her single syllable vocabulary and her movie magazine mind. You go beyond them. You risk whatever there is to be risked. Mostly, you risk yourself." And it's just like, fuck you, Nadine.
I'm doing the jack off hand gesture.
First of all, like, her shots at Lucy, like, are exactly what you're talking about here. Like, this, like, look at this shitty, I'm way better than this chick.
Yeah.
I don't think so, Nadine. But yeah, I mean, I think this lines with what we were talking about earlier, this idea of no choice, right? Like, that Larry rejects her and therefore all her choices have been taken away from her. What do you do when all of your you have literally infinity choices right now?
Yeah. Maybe you just find the idea of a dark adventure to be appealing.
Yeah.
And you don't care about anyone. And so you're going to go do that.
Yeah. You choose what's left. You choose whatever dark adventure was meant for you. No, Nadine. No.
Yes.
Yeah. Really
with
great
Edward
stuff.
Cullen. I mean, Randall Flagg.
So the chapter finishes up with Nadine, as we just talked about. We see her return home, kind of pack up her things, abandon the child Leo, who loves her and calls her Nadine mom. He just, fuck that kid. Don't care about him anymore, right?
Yeah, he's not. He learned how to talk, so I don't love him anymore.
Yeah. She rides up to the Sunrise Amphitheater, feeling free in the choice that she has made, even though she's damned herself. She takes with her, I called it a Ouija board for the simple way of describing it. It's not technically an Ouija board because it involves writing, which a Ouija board is mostly just like moving to letters to spell words. But this actually has writing. But that was the simplest way for me to write it down, Matt.
I don't know what this other thing is. Like, I've never seen one of them. The planchette board thing. I don't think I've ever actually seen one of those.
Let's just call it a Ouija board. I think it's easier.
Yeah, let's just call it a Ouija board. That'll make things simpler to call it. Just consistently call it the wrong thing.
There we go. Yeah, I'm sure that won't piss off any of our listeners at all.
Yeah. All right.
So, speaking of chocolate paydays, so she takes the Ouija board with her and heads up to the amphitheater, and she finds for her at the top, waiting for her, a flashlight, a pad of paper, and another planchette. As if meant, we don't learn who left the stuff for her, right? This is just kind of there for her at the top, waiting for her.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think it's just magic.
Sure. This leads to a flashback where we learn the last time she held one of these things, when she was just messing around with a group of girls in college. They were all just having fun. She takes control of the board, and then it reacts, and it reacts evilly. It promises death and destruction and the end of the world, unless it's actually, like, I'm not going to spend a lot of detail on the scene, but it's actually like a really creepy little scene up on its own. Like, just like you grab hold of the board, and then it's just like, it must have been absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, for
everyone involved.
No, it's a great scene. By the way, our resident person who keeps track of the differences between the original release and the version we're reading said that whole scene was not in the original cut.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I could see why you'd cut it, but I do think it helps understand Nadine a little bit more. Like, I think it helps maybe understand the inevitability of Nadine, that like we really see that she's been haunted by this thing her entire life, and you kind of maybe understand why she's just so exhausted by resisting it. Like, we've been very fairly critical of Nadine this week, I think, but like this thing has been hounding her entire life, you know?
Yeah, providing that scene makes her perspective a bit more sympathetic, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So she goes to the top and grabs the planchette and starts getting her next command, presumably from Flag. I love how this chapter ends, Matt. Nadine, beyond help or hope of succor, sat upright on the bench at the crest of Flagstaff Mountain in the black trench of morning, her eyes wide, that feeling of being on the border stronger than ever. She stared east, but felt his presence coming from behind her, pressing heavy on her, dragging her down like weights tied to the feet of a dead woman. Flag's dark presence coming in steady, inexorable waves. And then she says, "Write," and the planchette begins writing, and we don't get to see what it is because the chapter ends, unfortunately. But
sigh.
Not good.
No, probably something bad. It probably tells her to go find Harold or something.
I mean, we know that, right? Because we see that a couple days later she shacks up with Harold for some reason.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the most hilarious thing possible for poor incel Harold to get with the only girl in town that will definitely not sleep with you.
Yes. There's a great sitcom in the making.
Oh God!
In that house.
Yeah. And that is the end of our chapters, Matt. We as we said, a lot of committee meetings, a lot of things, a lot of drama certainly, but not a lot of actual plot events. But it does really feel like we're setting the stage for something in the coming weeks.
Yes, it does.
All right, so that is the end. Next week, we will be reading 3 more chapters, Matt. We're going to be going through chapters 54, 55, and 56. If you can believe it, we only have 5 more weeks of this, and we're done with The Stand. Can you believe that?
I cannot. That's amazing.
Yeah, we have 2 more weeks of book 2 of The Stand this week, or next week and the week after, and then 3 weeks of book 3, which bring us right to the end of the book. And then we have to watch a lot of Stand TV. There's a lot of miniseries we got to watch coming up. So get ready.
But we have to. Okay.
Yeah, it's on the schedule, Matt. The schedule is our Bible. We do not break from the schedule.
Okay. All right.
Do what God commands of you, Matt. Watch the Stand miniseries.
Okay. All right. That's
thank you.
With the new one or
both?
The new one?
We're watching both.
Okay.
God, it's like I work so hard. I chastise the listeners for not checking my beautiful Excel spreadsheet, and you don't do it either.
I just do what I'm told week to week. Can't look forward. I await my dark bridegroom.
Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Are we ready to move on to discussion questions now?
Let's please do. Yes.
Okay. All right. So our discussion question from last week, we actually get to do it this week because we did a good job on time, Matt. Good job, us. Let's pat ourselves on the back and read some discussion questions. What was the question last week?
What's your favorite character descriptions? So, there were some really, really great, short, succinct character descriptions last week that made us just really feel like we knew these characters immediately. Mm-hmm. Really good writers can do that, of course. So here from Pear Jane, we have, back in the 1980s, we collected film novelizations, books adapted from screenplays. Every one was pretty terrible, with the notable exception of The Goonies, which is really well written and told from Mikey's perspective. It includes a lot of scenes that we don't get in the movie. I know this movie isn't as near and dear to your heart as it is to the Gen Xers among us. Matt, parenthetically here, saying, yes, it is. But it's really a classic Stephen King-like story, isn't it? In any case, the line I remember from the book is regarding Mr. Perkins, the rich golf-playing jagoff who's buying out the Goondocks neighborhood, and he can so he can put a golf course. Mikey says he laughed like someone taught him how, and then stopped like he forgot how the rest of it went. That's a line dimmed by time and scrambled by memory, and I just tried looking it up in my decades-old copy, and now I'm not even sure it's from this book. It might be that I read it somewhere else and transposed it to Mr. Perkins' snotty laugh at the start of the movie. If anyone remembers where the line is from, please let me know. Google's no help. Well, sorry you couldn't find the source, Pear Jane, but that is a really excellent one-sentence descriptor that just makes you feel like you know this terrible person.
That's great. Yeah, I like Goonies. I don't think I worship Goonies, but I like Goonies.
No, that's fair. I wouldn't say worship, but it was a movie that I watched a bunch as a kid. It's got that edge to it, That yeah, it's good.
No, I agree. It's one of those things, like it's one of those movies that you want to be real. You watch it as a kid and you want it to be real. Like you want, I want this stuff to exist and I get to go see it. And because I'm a child, I earnestly believe that it does exist and I will get to do these exact kind of adventures later.
Exactly. Yes. That's what I want my life to be like. Yes.
Next, we have Hobo Demon, who says, Space Dandy. He's a dandy guy in space. Dandy means overly concerned with personal appearance and grooming above depth of personality as a means of fostering relationships. This is the skeleton of Dandy, as the episodic series explores an implied and at times explicit multiverse of dandies whose extraneous traits vary widely from episode to episode. Whether he's in Groundhog's Day or Dawn of the Dead or 12 Angry Men, acting as a trucker or a surfer or a mecha pilot, he's always a dandy guy in space. What is this?
I have no idea, and I kind of love it that way.
Great answer. I love that as a description of someone, but like you have told me nothing. Like he's an episodic series exploring an implied and at times explicit multiverse of dandies.
It seems like it's like a multiverse what's the word, anthology type series where the only piece of continuity perhaps is that we have our dandy guy who is always there and who is always dandy. It's borderline Lovecraftian, actually. I really love it.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild. Thank you so much, Hobo Demon. I'm gonna have to look up some Space Dandy.
Dandy.
It's probably an anime, isn't it? Wait, let me type it in here.
Okay. Is it?
It's a Japanese comic science fiction anime television series.
Perfect. That's exactly what it should be. All right. The Amazing Duck 42 says, Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide have some spectacular ones. My favorite, Vogons are not evil, but bad-tempered, bureaucratic, officious, and callous. They wouldn't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug bladder beast of Trawl, without orders signed in triplicate, sent in, sent back, queried, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally buried in soft peat for 3 months and recycled as firelighters. They have the sex appeal of a car accident. You know exactly what your interaction with that type of creature would be were you ever to meet one on a misguided hitchhiking adventure.
I love the word officious. I love that word so much. Yeah. Wasn't there a Cronenberg movie about people that like get super horny by like being involved in car accidents? Yes, Crash. There's a Cronenberg movie called Crash. So
no, I haven't
eat
seen
your
that.
heart out, Douglas Adams.
That's delightful, and don't ever want to watch that.
Some people think car accidents have a lot of sex appeal.
God. Some people think televisions have a lot of sex appeal. Also Cronenberg.
Oh, yes. Okay. I thought you just meant the concept of television. I was like, yeah, there's a lot of sex on there, Matt. I don't know if you watch TV lately.
The physical flesh television that you stick your hand into. What was that movie called? Shit. Anyway.
Videodrome?
Yeah, Videodrome. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next, we have Constant Reader 19, who says, the first author who came to mind when you asked about character description definitely isn't King-esque, but I can't help it. So I'm going with my childhood favorite, Roald Dahl, from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gate of the factory. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat, pointed black beard, a goatee, and his eyes were most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter, and oh, how clever he looked, how quick and sharp and full of life. He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that, taking everything in with those bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. That's great. I love that description so much, actually. That's wonderful. Whenever I think of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, though, I think of the movie, and I think of the incredibly wonderful Gene Wilder performance. And everyone's talked about the little bit about him doing the role, right, with the cane, like how that was like he insisted that be it. And that's like its own version of the perfect character description thing as well, I think.
Yeah, because it's understanding where you're coming from and playing with their expectations. That Roald Dahl is a genius at this because he writes these descriptions in a way where he's calibrating them to children, but then they work just as well on you as an adult. Good stuff. All right.
Yeah, really great.
Something Kooky says, there's a lot of wonderful descriptions out there, but one that is always stuck in my head comes from It. Scott, you'll stop me if there's a spoiler in here, I assume.
I think a description of a character is fine. I mean,
Okay.
read the description and maybe just hold up there.
Okay. When Stephen King describes young Beverly Marsh through the eyes of lovesick Ben Hanscom, it was Beverly Marsh, her auburn hair a dazzling cloud around her head and upon her shoulders, her eyes a lovely gray-green, her sweater pushed to her elbows, was frayed around the neck and almost as baggy as Ben's sweatshirt. Too baggy, certainly, to tell if she was getting any chest works yet, but Ben didn't care. When love comes before puberty, it can come in waves so clear and so powerful that no one can stand against its simple imperative, and Ben made no effort to do so now. He simply gave in. He felt both foolish and exalted, as miserably embarrassed as he ever had been in his life, and yet inarguably blessed. Yeah, there's
it goes on from there, but that's
the main description part.
Yeah, it's a good book. That It, Matt. It's a good book that you should read one day.
I'd like to read it someday.
Okay, well,
he said wistfully.
When you have my permission,
yes,
you will be able to.
By your leave.
Next, we have BC Johnson, who says, for character descriptions, I've always felt Raymond Chandler was one of the masters. You could probably grab any Chandler book and flip around for a few pages to find a killer one. Here's a description of a shady character like one page into Farewell, My Lovely. A man was looking up at the sign, too. He was looking up at the dusty windows with a sort of ecstatic fixity of expression, like a hunky immigrant catching his first sight of the Statue of Liberty. He was a big man, but not more than 6 feet 5 inches tall and not wider than a beer truck. The description continues after a few sentences. He was worth looking at. He wore a shaggy Brosolino hat, a rough gray sports coat with white golf balls on it for buttons, a brown shirt, a yellow tie, pleated gray flannel slacks, and alligator shoes with white explosions on the toes. From his outer breast pocket cascaded a show handkerchief of the same brilliant yellow as his tie. There were a couple colored feathers tucked into the band of his hat, but he didn't really need them. Even on Central Avenue, not the quietest dressed street in the world, he looked about as inconspicuous as a tarantula on a slice of angel food. That's great. That last bit, I think, seals it for me. I think that's really wonderful. We've talked about this before, but I am not one of those readers that is like incredibly visual in like what the characters look like and what they're wearing. Like that's just not. I just don't read that way. But like if I was just reading this particular description casually, like I wouldn't have been able to actually create a vision map of like what he's yellow tie and flannel slacks and all these things, but like that thing at the end, that emotional tie of he looked about as inconspicuous as a tarantula on a slice of angel food. Like I would have an emotional description in my head, bam, with that instantly, and I would just know who this guy is. So I think that's a great example.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for myself, I might paint that picture in the moment of the description, but then not really keep it. I would just retain the emotional impression. Yeah. Sure. All right. Walk-in Dude 22 says, maybe it's because I see 11 million different renderings of A Christmas Carol every year, but Dickens sprang immediately to mind. But he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Does characterization get any better than that? I'd leave it to you. No.
Charles Dickens rules.
Yeah.
We said that enough? He rules.
Yes, he does. He's particularly good at this thing.
Mm-hmm. I read A Christmas Carol every year at Christmas time. I watch like 3 different versions of the movie and I read it on my own. It's great. It's great. Everyone should read A Christmas Carol. It's short Dickens. You don't get that very often. So read A Christmas Carol. It's really good.
Yeah, I think I've read it.
Last but certainly not least, we have No Sleeping Beauty, who says, this quote is from the Lorax. The character description that I've always loved in my childhood was, he was oldish and shortish and brownish and mossy, and he spoke in a voice that was sharpish and bossy. Maybe not what you were thinking of when you asked the question, but it's the first thing that came to mind. No, that is perfect, actually, because it's Dr. Seuss, man. Dude was good at what he was doing. I mean, that's great.
Yeah. Well, it's actually kind of important in Dr. Seuss books that he do this, because you, as the grown-up reading the book to the kid, usually need some cues on how you're supposed to do this character. And so knowing that you want kind of a sharp, older, bossy voice, it's like, yeah, that's all I need. Thank you. That's my direction. It's really good.
Yeah, it's great. That was some great answers. I'm so glad we got to do this week, because we were responsible with our time and we actually got to read these. Thank you, everyone who sent those in. That was really, really wonderful.
Yeah, those are great.
All right, Matt, what is our question for next week?
Your favorite fictional dog.
We really struggled with the question this week. It's just kind of a weird week where we're setting up a lot of stuff and there's just not a lot of discussion points. So yeah, we went with an easy one. What is dogs? Everybody loves dogs. What is your favorite fictional dog?
Right. Everybody's going to have an answer to this one for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right, folks, that is going to do it for us here this week. As we said, next week, The Stand continues with chapters 44 through 46, including chapter 45. So read those chapters and then join us next week to talk about them. It's going to be fun, Matt. I obviously I know what's coming, but I don't remember exactly when it's going to be coming. So I don't know if it's going to be this week or further into the reading. I don't know. So
all right.
I'm excited about my lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I also don't know what's coming next week. So there you go.
I mean, that is always true, Matt.
The idea. But yeah, remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit is the main place to deliver your answers to the discussion question.
If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you never miss a single solitary episode. We've only got a few more episodes of season 2 in the pipeline, including 2 episodes covering 2 different miniseries. Matt, just so you know, just reminding you of that, since you don't check the calendar, but you don't want to miss those, Matt and listeners. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss those episodes.
That's right. And if you want to support Kingslingers, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patron Hillary L. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over there on the Patreon.
Yeah, tons of bonus content, tons of fun stuff. There's a poll going on right now for what our episode on our Doofcast is going to be about in a couple weeks, our Doof Canon episode, where we try to decide what movies are worthy of being in our illustrious canon of the best films ever. Our patrons are voting on what movie we're going to watch and talk about right now. So you should become a patron and participate in that wonderful vote.
Yeah.
But of course, there are still tons of ways to help us out. If you cannot support us on Patreon, you can share the podcast. Please keep sharing it. We keep seeing emails and stuff from people that said they found it from people sharing it, and we're just loving it. So please keep that up. And of course, you can always leave us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Ryan M6, who gives us 5 stars and says, by far my favorite King Pod. I started listening to this because I just began rereading the Dark Tower series, and it's been highly recommended. I'm so glad I did. Great quality show, and I love that the hosts are thorough, knowledgeable, and most importantly, excited about what they're covering. We are excited. I'm so excited, Matt.
I am. I don't think we'd be doing this if we weren't.
No, I'm so happy. I'm loving this book. I'm loving talking about it with you, and I'm glad that is showing to all of our listeners. So thank you so much, Ryan. And there's an example. See, highly recommended. You people are doing your work, and we really appreciate it.
Yes.
Please keep recommending us. Thank you so much for the kind words, and thanks for everything. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks all you recommenders out there.
Yeah. All right, folks, we'll see you back here next week for more Stand, more Payday bars, the whole 9 yards, long days, and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
Did you see that like half of our listeners decided to pretend that they really like paydays, that they like the most delicious candy bar in the world or something? Total bullshit, right?
Never even had a payday.
Well,
definitely they're all liars though.
They're totally liars. Nobody, that's impossible.